Good evening and welcome. Tonight we'll be going over the history and geography of Seychelles. Seychelles is a very interesting little country, and I definitely mean little country. It is the smallest country in Africa, and it has the smallest population out of any country in Africa. As of 2019, it has, according to Google in 2019, it has 97,625 people on all the islands combined. And this isn't even all of the islands right here. These islands are called the inner islands. The outer islands are a good 621 miles away from these islands. So, these islands, and the others I suppose, are in the Indian Ocean, a bit north of Madagascar. Actually, the other islands are on the other side of this map, so let's do a little zoom out adventure. And let's sail over to this part of the map. Can't we see? There we go. I'm just going to have to hold it. So, there you can see Seychelles. And as you can see, the other islands are very tiny dots. These are mostly coral islands, especially the ones out here. They're actually called the Coralline Islands. The most interesting one, in my opinion, is this one. It's the farthest west. It's called Aldabra. It's actually mostly a nature reserve. It's a giant atoll. And it has a huge population of giant Aldabra tortoises. They're these big old round boys, and they live for like hundreds and hundreds of years. You know, all the wonderful bells and whistles of tortoises. They're so cute. And we're back. Okay, back to the main islands after that little interlude. These islands are not coral. The main three islands we're going to talk about are actually granite islands. So the first one we'll talk about is the biggest one. It is called Mahe. You can see the capital of Seychelles right here, called Victoria. And nearly everybody who is a Seychelles citizen, or Seychellois as they call themselves, lives on this island. Almost everyone in the capital city. I think it's like, yeah, I'm trying to remember my numbers. It's like 98% of the population lives on these three islands, and 90% of that, 98%, lives on this island. So, very important island in that respect, for a couple of reasons, not just because of the capital city, but because it has an international airport. It's actually the smallest country with its own international airline. Very important to its history. We'll get into that. You can see right here, this little plus here designates a high mountain. That mountain is Morne Seychellois. It's the highest point in Seychelles. The longest river, you can't really see it on here because it's so small, but it's the Cascade River flowing down from the mountains up here. And over here you can see Praslin Island and La Digue up here. Very rocky, and very, very forested. These islands are famous for growing coconuts and for having lots of wildlife variety, like certain types of endemic palm trees and loads of animal life. The tortoises, like I mentioned, they're the best animals on Seychelles, in my opinion. They're so cute. And essentially, these islands, or this one's Silhouette Island, that's a good one. These islands are, like I said, they're not volcanic, unlike lots of other little island nations, and they're out of the cyclone belt of the Indian Ocean. It's known as, its nickname is, the land of perpetual summer. Seychelles is mainly known for its luxurious vacation resorts. Many of the rich and famous spend their vacations here at Seychelles. As you can imagine, absolutely gorgeous beaches, very delicious looking food, all the bells and whistles of just an island paradise. So, let me see. Just going over my notes. Oh, I didn't mention that it has 115 islands total. Only about 40 of them are populated. Most of the outer islands that I showed you over there are extremely sparsely populated. Some are only temporarily populated. And, way more than half the islands of Seychelles are not inhabited whatsoever. Mainly because they're nature reserves, or like I said, they're just like coral islands. Not really the best place to build your home. So, let's see. Now, did I get everything? Oh, I didn't. As I said, it's in the Indian Ocean. It's in the Somalia Sea. So, that's also kind of important later on in its history. And kind of so today. I'll just mention it now. We're going to do Somalia, actually, in a week, like a week and a half. But nowadays, one of the things that is synonymous with Somalia is pirates. And Seychelles does get its fair amount of pirate, I suppose, attacks on ships and various other coasts here. So the Seychelles government really, really works to combat not just the piracy in their waters, but along Somalia's as well. And now I think I've got everything in my notes. Let me glance over. Pretty sure, yeah, I got everything. Let's get into its history, because, as always, it's very interesting. Seychelles is one of those few places on Earth that was not populated until it was discovered by Europeans. There is some little evidence that the Indonesian, Southeast Asian peoples who explored the Indian Ocean might have stopped by for a bit. I mentioned them in my Madagascar video. I'll link it up there. There's also some evidence that maybe some Arab traders stopped by, but there's no signs at all of permanent residence in these islands whatsoever. The very first sighting of the islands, from what we know from human eyes, was in 1503. An armada commanded by Vasco da Gama sailed by, and they wrote it down in their notes. The first time in recorded history that we know of that humans actually walked on Seychelles was in 1609. A fleet from the British East India Company was blown offshore on their way to India, and they landed on the island here and noted that there's nobody here, and there's lots of fish, and there's lots of birds, and there's, not the worst place to get stranded at sea, honestly. So, that was also noted down. So since it was noted down, and since it wasn't really controlled by anybody, it became a big pirate haven, also like I mentioned in my Madagascar video. And that was finally curbed by the French when they decided that they were going to control the islands in the year 1756. They named the islands after, very oddly enough, I couldn't find why, they named it after Louis XV's Minister of Finance. His name was Jean Moreau de Seychelles. So here's, maybe they just named so many places they were running out of important people and they're just going down the list. I don't know, maybe he had a thing for turtles or something, I don't know, but they decided to name it after him. It was not really considered very valuable or important for the French, or really anyone in general. There were people living here, but it wasn't like, like it was very clear that this wasn't going to become like a big plantation island like some of their other properties. They already had Mauritius, which I've also done in a video, which was kind of their big plantation island, so to say. So Seychelles was kind of minor in that respect, in that it didn't have the resources they really were looking for or wanted to grow. But also, like I've mentioned in a few of my earlier videos, I know I really mentioned it in my video on St. Lucia, that the British and the French do not get along whatsoever until World War I. And mostly the aftermath of World War One, they finally decide that they're friends. So whenever war broke out between the English and the French, they decided to just nab each other's little territories around the world. So when they were having a go at each other in 1794, British ships arrived and they were like, give us these islands. And the guy in charge was just like, okay. And he gave up the islands the next day without putting up any kind of fight. Like I said, it was not as valuable to the French as other places were. So the English took control. A lot of French culture stayed. As you can see, this is yet another victim of the British not knowing how to spell things in French. And this is not how you spell Seychelles, and it's definitely not how you pronounce Seychelles. It's definitely pronounced Seychelles today. Yeah, too many places are named the way they are because the British people who took it over didn't know how to spell or pronounce anything in French. So the French are in control. It eventually becomes a British Crown colony in 1903. In the meantime, leading up to that, they obviously brought in a lot of slaves to try to work out some kind of industry. It took them a while just to figure out to do coconuts and other kind of like tropical crops and resources. So they brought in African slaves, mainly from Madagascar, and eventually Indian indentured servants. So the main population of Seychelles, the Seychellois, are descendants of these slaves. So the World Wars happen, right? Seychelles gets very much neglected by Britain during this time because they have a lot of other problems going on than to worry about this very tiny little island chain. People are upset by this and decide to push for independence. And thankfully, after World War II, many major world powers that had colonies were very open to the idea of independence. So independence was granted to Seychelles in 1976, and it joined the Commonwealth, which it's still part of today. The Commonwealth of Nations, if you don't know, is like a big friend circle of former British colonies that still receive aid from Britain, but they're not at all like owned by Britain or a part of Britain or technically like British soil, but they're still associated with Britain. It's a very strange little thing, but I don't know. It makes everyone happy, I suppose. However, some people weren't happy about this. In the 1970s, they open up the airport and they start their booming tourist industry, and it takes off in a big way in the 1970s. It becomes the playground of the rich and famous. And, they suddenly have a huge tourist industry, but some people weren't happy about that, including the Prime Minister. His name was Franz-Albert René, and he organized a coup in 1977, overthrew the president while he was in London, and took over, and eventually established a one-party state in 1979. It was mainly like a Soviet Union aligned state. Like if they had to pick sides in the Cold War, they would pick the Soviet Union. And there were many coup attempts to try to overthrow René's government. All throughout the 1980s, there were many, but the most notorious one is Operation Angela. Let me put pencil down to go over Operation Angela, because it's kind of a wild ride. So, the former president of Seychelles goes to the South African government and asks for help to organize a coup. South African government says sure, puts it in charge of, someone else who represented the government, which, of course, the government very quickly denies after the fact. But they hatch this scheme, and they fly to Seychelles disguised as a rugby team, and they're very nearly through like customs and, getting their passport stamped. Almost everyone's through with no problem until security finds an AK-47 in their bag, which is kind of an unusual thing for a rugby team to bring to the country. So the coup participants whip out their guns, and just start firing. Don't worry, there is only one person who was killed from the Seychelles, and he's considered like a hero today, but we'll get to him in a minute. No one in the initial gunfight that broke out at the airport were killed, so don't worry about that. But yeah, they took over the airport. Rene obviously flips out, shuts down the country, obviously because he didn't know the extent of how big this plot was. And he has the airport surrounded by military. The one person who did lose their life was in like a truck that barged in to try to stop them. And when he came out, the militants, I suppose, the coup attempters, what would you call them? Oh well, they murdered him, but that's kind of self-defense. So anyway, in the meantime, remember, they are at the airport, right? They realize in the radio tower they get a call from like a regular airline from India requesting to land to refuel so they could go to Harare in Zimbabwe. And they were like, yeah, sure, they had no other way out of the airport. They were surrounded totally. All the other airplanes were all shot up. And here was their escape. So they gave this airplane clearance to land, even though the airport was very dark. The pilots managed to land the plane. They promptly storm it, guns blazing. Again, no one on the airplane's hurt, so don't worry. And they demand to be flown back home. So that was the end of that. Definitely a wild ride. But there were other less exciting coup attempts that happened. But it wasn't those that brought down the one-party state. In 1991, after the Soviet Union collapsed, Rene just basically changed his mind and said, you know what, we can have, multiple parties who can run in elections, and we'll rewrite the Constitution, just to not have what happened over there happen here, since, this is the big collapse of communism phase around the world. Just decided to avoid it completely by just pretending none of that just happened. Let's just go back to how it was in the meantime. So ever since then, elections have been, free and fair. In October 2020, the election resulted in their first ever transition to an opposition party control. Their current president is named, I believe it's Wavel Ramkalawan. He was a former Anglican priest who spoke out in his sermons against the socialist state that was there in the 80s, and rose to prominence since then, and entered the political scene just before everything was undone. So he's the current president. As of today, the day that I'm filming this, Seychelles is the most vaccinated country in the world against COVID-19. But I'm pretty sure that's just because they have a population of 97,000. And, that's math, basically. So they reopened their borders to tourists back in March 2021, not requiring vaccines or anything. I guess they're that confident in the vaccines entirely. But it's, they need money, and they get most of their money from tourism, and they need to get tourists here somehow. So that's the plan for Seychelles. We'll just see how it goes. I know they're actually having another wave at the moment, even though most of the people are vaccinated, but it happens. You hear all the time people saying, oh, I got the flu even though I had the flu shot. But that is where we are today. Seychelles is a really beautiful, beautiful country. I highly recommend, if you never have, to look up pictures of it. And in my opinion, Seychelles has the most beautiful flag in the world. Absolutely gorgeous. I should have looked it up. Whoever created that flag, A+. It's gorgeous. And It makes me smile whenever I see it because it's just so beautiful. So anyway, I'll leave you with that tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video relaxing and educational. I hope you learned something neat tonight. I hope also, more importantly, that you have a very good